Welcome to the Shift Report, the podcast from MCentric and the MCentric Foundation. MCentric is the go-to information and resources hub designed exclusively for the emergency medicine community. We regularly host key leaders from the field who share their insights and experience. Our goal is to inform our listeners and to encourage you to use what you learn to improve your practice and improve yourself. To learn more, please visit us at mcentric.org. Today's episode is sponsored by Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing provides consulting services designed to prioritize clinician wellness in order to provide the best care for their patients. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing supports healthcare professionals with personalized coaching and consulting services for groups and individuals in areas such as career development, leadership, burnout prevention, practice management, and more. For more information, visit lotusclinicianwellbeing.com. Today, we welcome Mike Granovsky. Dr. Granovsky lives and works in the Washington, D.C. area. He received a medical degree from Tufts and completed residency at the George Washington University. He's turned his interest in the nuts and bolts of how reimbursement works into a thriving business at Logix Health. He's also well known for educating emergency physicians on the nuances of billing and coding, some of the things we never thought we needed to understand, but it turns out we really do. Welcome, Mike.
Till, thanks so much. And it's a pleasure to be here today since Dr. Jolly and I worked together. And he made me promise that I wouldn't say he was one of my mentors, but actually he was. And I've got great memories of some very specific trauma resuscitations that we did together in the CT scanner.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a common thing that many people who train with and around people have memories of specific cases that sort of always are there. I've got a few of those too. So thanks, Mike, and thanks for taking the time to share some of your insights. So everybody's got a path. You've got one too. Everybody's path is a little bit different. So what drove you into emergency medicine?
Yeah, that's a great issue. So I started in surgery actually, and found that I really, for sure, was a hospital-based physician. And after a couple of years of surgery, I realized that I wanted a cognitive component to what I was doing beyond just differential diagnosis and sort of, where to cut and what operation would be taking place. So emergency medicine was a perfect advancement that added procedural skills on top of the cognitive effort that, our specialty is known for. And I think there are those of us that gravitate towards sicker patients, those of us that gravitate towards less sick patients. And my favorite rotation as a resident was actually at Maryland Shock Trauma. The more the stuff, sort of the better. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but I got lucky and had an opportunity to start my own group with a couple of terrific folks from residency. And that's what led to sort of the next chapter.
So that's great. And so, I do want to remind everybody that we all have surgical friends and they all are in a cognitive specialty. It's just very procedure based. And everybody, I think one of the things that we try to emphasize to students and residents is that, asking someone to make a decision about their career at a relatively young age is probably not reasonable for some people. And there are ways to change your focus as time goes on. And you did change your focus. Tell us about starting a group. It was quite a while ago, and you got together with people and started a group and had to find a place to work. Tell us how that worked.
So it's the late 1990s, and the job market was fine in the DC area. There were a couple of little groups available, but it was pretty tough to get a contract. The idea that, a group of emergency physicians, as opposed to what was then in M-Care or Team Health, would get a contract that the hospital would trust you with running their emergency department 24/7, 365. It was really tough. And, the M-Cares of the world, they had huge marketing budgets, they had deliverables, they had glossy pie charts. And we just were sort of a bedraggled bunch of folks and scrubs that were really devoted to good clinical care. And there was a small community hospital in southern Prince George's County that M-Care actually pulled out of. They couldn't make it profitable. It was kind of low volume. It was only 15,000 visits. And the medical director at the time was my chief resident. And he called me, I can remember it to this day, and said, "Hey, do you want to start a group with us? I think you have a little bit of business interest. Maybe you could help on that front. And there's going to be four of us." And we came together. We started this democratic group. There were four of us, and we worked it in a single coverage model for a year and a half with just four people until bringing on, a fifth and then a sixth. And ultimately, we grew that little emergency department to 50,000 visits, which was terrific. And I will say, and this is a little bit of a lesson that I try to pass on to my kids as I've gotten older. The best thing about that group wasn't that we were clinically successful. That was really satisfying. It wasn't that we were monetarily successful. We were really successful. Everybody ended up with vacation homes, is the way my wife sort of sums it up. Um, we had a fabulous esprit de corps. If somebody was sick, you worked a full 24 hours. If somebody had a death in the family, you stayed overnight and worked the next day. And it was that camaraderie that is something that'll be with me really forever. I think similar to the bond that you have actually as residents working together. This was even more intimate though, because it was just four of us. And then there was a big business component, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yeah, that's a great story. And for those who are not in the Washington, D.C. area, Southern Prince George's County is in Maryland, just and right up against Washington, D.C., with all of its various academic and other large volume places. And so the challenges of going to a place as four, and I think as you do the math on that, handling 24/7, 365 with four people is a fairly remarkable story just in itself. And that lesson of camaraderie and esprit de corps in any work environment for your kids and otherwise is a great one. So there's lots of ways to ask this. You got brought in the group partly because the other people trusted you, and partly because they thought you had some business interest. What was your interest, and what was your skill set going into that, and what did you get asked to do?
Yeah, it's a great question, Till, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that part of the story. It's probably the most sort of sentinel bifurcation that took place in my life, besides maybe getting married. There were four of us. Everybody had a lot of responsibility. And Jim Scott, who is one of the deans of GW and worked along with Dr. Jolly and I, he and I do some lecturing together, and he always jokes that I drew the short straw and got responsible for the finances. Yeah, I think it was a little bit more than that. Everybody had something they wanted to do, and I had a business interest. That meant that I had a legal pad, and I had what I have still today, which is my fifth grade solar powered calculator that I would walk around with because we didn't have smartphones. I was good at math. I had taken some business classes. I had taken some Wharton classes and done even some stock trading at an early age. And that seemed to be enough because nobody else had any interest. I think they trusted me just because we all knew each other so well, and we'd worked together for a long time during residency. So the first problem that we had was, how do we get funding to start a group? So you start seeing patients, but in emergency medicine, you don't really get any revenue in the door for 60, 80, 90 days. And we were fine not paying ourselves, sort of just having sweat equity accumulate and grow this little business. But we had to pay the PAs, we had to have health insurance, we had to set up a retirement plan, we had legal costs. We had about $400,000 or $500,000 of costs in 1990 dollars. So maybe $1 million, $1.5 million. And I thought, well, we're a bunch of physicians. We're going to go out and get a loan. And I called up the local banks near my home. And since we didn't have any business history, they had no interest. So I got in my car and I drove back to the hospital post shift. And I went to all the banks around the hospital and said, see that building? We're treating 15,000 patients a year, and that building's been open, that emergency department, for 15 years. That business is a stable business. and I'd like you to loan us $400,000 to get the business started. And bank after bank after bank, literally within eye shot of the hospital, turned me down because we didn't have any business history. We didn't have a tax return. We had a little pro forma that I'd written on my yellow legal pad. So I had to get a little bit creative. I put my single suit back on and figured out who held the contract that was a private physician group before MCare. And it was this little entity that was in Fauquier County, Virginia, which is like 70 miles away. There was a gentleman, he started the original group at that hospital, and he still banked in that town. And he had his lockbox there during the 7 or 8 years that they ran the practice. So I drove to that bank. It's a little tiny bank. It had a single phone number in literally a zero stoplight town. And I walked in and I said, "Hey, remember Dr. X?" And he was still banking there. I've taken over his practice and it's thriving. And we'd like you to be our lockbox. We want to keep our money here. And I gotten a little bit smart because I realized I should lead with what I was going to give them rather than what they
Right.
were going to
Yes.
give me. There was a little bit of trial and error. Um, and I showed them, how much we thought would come in. They knew how much was coming in previously under the prior owner. And then all the way at the end, once the lockbox forms were signed and we agreed to the fees, then I said, well, we just need a loan to get this, pump prime to get things started. And we ended up borrowing $400,000, very old school now. We had a closing dinner and all of our spouses had to sign on that loan. And that was a big deal. Some of us had little townhouses at that time, and we felt like our whole fortune was riding on this venture. Then there were some more things to come.
Yeah, that's that there's lots of lessons in there for emergency medicine and frankly starting a business and learning along the way, and even the lesson of making sure you lead with what you're going to do for the business partner, or the financing partner, not necessarily what they're going to do for you. I think that's if we end up with just that lesson, that's a good one. So that group grew, and you mentioned going from 15,000 to 50,000 visits a year and hiring other physicians and growing that group. And along the way, you've progressed, and I think people will Google you and find your name if they don't already know who you are as, a billing and coding expert who runs a large company that does this. I can recall my first experience moonlighting and being asked to code on a sheet of paper for what I was doing, which nobody had ever taught me how to do. And I'm sure I did most of them incorrectly. The director just kind of gave me the sheet of paper and said, code the visit this way. There's a lot more to billing, coding, reimbursement than that. How'd you go from small group, the business guy, going around in your one suit getting a loan, to really understanding and teaching about, a process that's really fundamental to the finances of what we do?
That was a really fun exploration. It was definitely drinking from the fire hose, and I guess an example of necessity as the mother of invention. So we got our loan and we got started, and we're seeing the patients, we're writing the charts, we're using old school T-chart templates, which not a single, maybe there's like one ED in the country that has them still. And the patients were coming, and I thought things were going to be great, but no money was coming in. So I got in my car and I found out who our biller was. I didn't even know they had been hired before I started. I think they were in place maybe with a prior group, or the hospital had hired them for us or something. And I spoke to the principal of that billing company, and she was working out of her garage. And our NCR paper was stacked up, dusty in the corner. And I said, "Hey, like, no money's coming in. What's the story?" And we started to go through things, and I noticed, oh, there are a lot of these twos and threes and ones associated with our visits. What are those? Oh, those are the codes. Well, how many codes are there? Well, there are five. well, how come we're only using the 1, 2, and 3, and we're never using the 4 and the 5? And something didn't quite seem right. So I asked her, well, who does the coding? Oh, well, that's a guy, instead of working out of my garage, he works out of his basement. So I get back in my car and I drive a couple of miles away and I find the gentleman in his basement working on our records. And I asked him, hey, how do you decide a 1, 2, 3? And he said, well, like I took a course at a community college. It was 80 hours long. And, if they're really sick and die, they might be a 5. And otherwise, they're kind of a 1, 2, or 3. And I realized I had no idea. And that all of the revenue, I couldn't argue. I didn't know. Maybe that was correct. But my pro forma showed we were going to collect $150 a patient, and it looked like we were going to collect $50 a patient. And these 3 other folks working 24/7, 365, and putting, as Tilly said, putting their trust in me, I was going to let them down. And I am a person who takes their responsibilities seriously. I left that meeting. I drove right to a brick and mortar Barnes and Noble, and I pulled Coding for Dummies off of the shelf. And I sat there for 6 hours. I read it cover to cover. I got some other books on medical coding. And the following Monday, I drove to a rural place in Virginia and lived and ate my meals out of a Sheetz gas station and went to a medical coding boot camp. I spent 5 days. And just like now, folks sort of create their own legitimacy in the ultrasound world by getting an RDMS certification. I became one of the first certified medical coders in the country at the end of that week. And then took over the coding myself, developed a charge master for us, had an RFP for a coding company, hired a new company, tried to sort of impart my philosophy to that company. And they ultimately made me their medical director. That was a small company. It was out of the southwestern US, and they did a great job for us. And we hit our $150. But there were a lot of steps between being the medical director of a small company and running my own big national billing company.
There are lessons in there. There are lots of lessons in there. One of them is just about putting in the work and deciding, okay, something on which my livelihood and my colleagues' livelihood depends. It depends on me knowing how to do it. And I can't really trust somebody to do it just for me. I'm going to put my head down and learn it myself. And I think that's also another, we mentioned lessons for your kids. I think that's another valuable one, is realizing that, you're responsible for your own welfare and knowledge, and you better go learn it if you need to. So you've done lots of things in this, and the coding world is a bit of a mystery, and you now have progressed into Logix Health. What do we need to know about the world of coding? That's kind of a long, that's probably a 3-hour course you do. But physicians, every encounter we have involves various codes that are, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and diagnosis codes and other things around them. What do we need to know about that if we're not business experts and aren't going to become coders?
So for the last 25 years as a certified coder, and then I became the course director of the ACEP reimbursement conference, and Logix Health has grown to be by far the largest ED coding and billing company in the country. We process a little over 15 million annual encounters, so way over a million a month. It's interesting if I think about the ratio of 15,000 in that first group to 15 million. It does feel like it's been a good career of building and work. And I continue to work with really, really great people at Logix Health, and the company continues to thrive. One of the things that's interesting when I do a lot of upstream education for, let's say, medical students or health policy fellows that don't know that much about coding, when you reduce the whole process down, Dr. Jala, you've had a long, long, illustrious career. Have you ever been called by Aetna, Cigna, United Healthcare and asked about your perspective on the patient's care? They had a 6-hour ED stay You diagnosed a subtle pulmonary embolus, probably saved their life. Did United Healthcare, has the phone ever rang in the ED with the insurance company, trying to understand the nuances of the visit? I'm thinking no.
No, that's never happened to me, and never happened to anyone I know. I recall one story from residency. I, like you, started out in surgery, and back in the old days, if there was a dispute about billing, I recall being taught to sit at the desk in the ICU and ask for the person from Aetna or Blue Cross's name and the spelling of it to put it in the chart, and that threat would be enough to get them to back off. And those times have changed. But to your question, no, I've never been, nobody at Aetna or Blue Cross or anybody's ever bothered to call me and ask me about the clinical care of a patient.
And then, so not only are they not talking to us, but they're not talking, the insurance company, they're not talking to the patient either. They're never calling the patient. And the average Epic record is 10, 12 pages for an ED chart. There are 150 million ED visits a year. So pretty easy to do the math. We're close to about 2 billion pages of paper. And the insurance company business model in a reductionist way is take premium dollars in. There's some operating expenses to process the claims, and then payment goes out to hospitals and physicians. Well, I guess they decided they didn't want the 2 billion pieces of paper because that would really increase their internal processing costs managing all that. As a result, not only do they not talk to the doctor, they don't talk to the patient, they don't read the medical record either. So the whole process, 18% of GDP, and certainly all of the physician services in the emergency department, they're all dependent on these 5-digit codes. And it's all on the honor system. If you code a little higher, there's a fee schedule and the money will be higher. If you code inappropriately, there's lots of checks and balances. You can consider it just like filing a tax return. It's government money. It needs to be treated very, very responsibly. The way the regulators look at it is this is the Medicare Trust Fund. It's what all of us as citizens pay through our tax process. When you look at your paycheck, if you're a W-2 employee, you've got FICA, and that's broken up into two components. That's Social Security, which has a cap, and Medicare, which does not have a cap. It's a flat tax, about 1.24, 1.25%. That is the money that goes into the Medicare Trust Fund and ultimately goes to pay for healthcare. And the regulators are very protective of that money. So there's a really important check and balance that we want to code appropriately for what we've done. And we want to represent the highly complex work that's always taking place in EDs all around the country, but incredibly mindful of the rules with maximal compliance at the same time. And as a result, there's a lot of money, but a lot of rules. So there's a big cottage industry of policy experts. And I've been fortunate to be the national chair of the American College of Emergency Physicians Coding and Nomenclature Advisory Committee, the National Reimbursement Committee, and the course director for the ACEP reimbursement course for the last 22 years. In fact, we're talking today close to Halloween, and the ACEP reimbursement conference is taking place in Orlando in January for anyone who's interested in more information. Until you can feel free to put my contact information any place that's useful to the podcast, and I'm happy to take people's further questions. But it's been a great, great journey becoming a subject matter expert, and I feel very fortunate because I was recognized with the Judith Tintnally Lifetime Education Award just a couple of years ago by ACEP, and that was certainly the textbook in hard copy, showing my age, that I dog-eared while Dr. Jolly was teaching me during residency, read cover to cover.
Yeah, that's and well deserved. Congratulations on that. I mean, Judy Titnally was a giant in our specialty, and yes, we all had her book, the hard copy version, big thick book, and that was the book. That was the book from which one learned emergency medicine. A great leader and a great honor. You mentioned earlier as we were talking, setting this up, there's some things coming from regulators. There always are things coming and changing and billing and coding. It's a little bit hard to keep up with, but you keep up with them as your job. What things are coming in? We're in late 2024 to affect 2025. from the federal government or other sources?
Yeah, you caught us at a good time in the regulatory cycle. So we're sitting here around Halloween, and the Medicare physician fee schedule final rule usually comes out right in the beginning of November, and it's probably going to come out in the next week or so. And it's a 2,000, 3,000 page rule, and we, dutifully digest it all. And those regulations impact care that's delivered after January 1st. And I've got a nice team and we work through it. And some of the areas that seem to be in flux are what are called shared visits. What do we have to document when we're seeing a patient with a physician assistant? And we think that language will be favorable. Other areas relate to critical care or observation. And we have brand new coding guidelines in 2023 that everybody's still kind of getting the touch and feel of. The prior guidelines were formed in 1995. So we had 28 years of once in my whole career. We had the same guy, even Dr. Jolly's whole career.
Mm-hmm.
We had the same guidelines for 28 years, 1995 to 2023. And now we have new guidelines. So we're still right in the beginning of that. And we get little clarifications as the different rules come out each year now.
Yeah. So this has been a wonderful conversation. And as you have pointed out, there are courses, multiple day courses that don't teach one how to be a coder, but teach emergency physicians what they need to know, either individually or as, the person in the group who knows the most about this, which, hopefully every group, certainly the large companies have entire staffs to do this. And hopefully the smaller groups have someone who sort of takes this as their thing. From what you've learned, which is a lot about this, what advice would you have for a small group that, a small Democratic group that is, manages, a couple of hospitals to enhance their survival chances, not to over dramatize it, and to really thrive in the current environment?
It's a great issue as we look towards the future. One thing, and if we go through sort of the anatomy of our conversation today, if you can create an esprit de corps, that's fabulous, priceless, and it will pay dividends for you both in group survival and cohesion because it is a work marriage and things happen. People's, as we get older, our parents have illnesses or a kid, is home from school unexpectedly and we need to pull together. The second message is a little less positive, which is the medical staff won't save you. If you think, well, they would never kick us out, the medical staff has not saved groups characteristically over time. And even favored CEOs, they turn over. The average hospital CEO only lasts a couple of years. So get a little sophisticated. Get somebody on the board. That is probably the single best thing you can do. Form a good relationship or even purchase a small internal medicine practice. That's a great opportunity. As Dr. Jolly mentioned, pick somebody to be your coding and billing expert and hold your coding and billing company accountable for transparency and delivering a great service. Those are some of the key items. Another big one is the No Surprises Act came into being 2 years ago, and we could have a whole really long discussion about it. It's super complex. So we're going to do this more at the 100,000 foot level. Some groups that had the ability that were big didn't contract with payers and they charged a lot. And ultimately, the patient was responsible for a lot. And Congress got wind of it and decided we're going to pass an act. It's called the No Surprises Act. And when everyone goes to get healthcare now, you actually sign something as part of your consent that says, I know I'm not going to get a surprise bill. What that's done is it's leveled the playing field, at least from a contracting perspective, between small groups and large groups. It used to be the large groups would get gigantic dollars from a small percentage of the payer mix. And that's no longer the case. In fact, for those who are interested at Scientific Assembly this year, 2024, the Rory Lecture talks about this a little bit. I had the pleasure and privilege of doing that alongside with my colleague, Tom Mayer. And we talked about some of the opportunities for Democratic groups. The No Surprises Act has allowed Democratic groups potentially to grow. And this is your day. If you have a little bit of an inkling to be entrepreneurial, this is the opportunity. It probably won't get better. And it's generational. I got lucky and started a group in the 90s. There were very, very, very few people over the last 20 years who successfully started groups. This is a generational shift and a single opportunity for the next year, couple of years related to this leveling of the playing field for contracting and sort of teeing things up so that you're on more of an even keel with some of the larger groups.
That's great, and that's an interesting perspective on the No Surprises Act, which is quite complicated and dense, as most congressional acts and rules are. But the perspective of it as a potential opportunity is not something you hear very much. So thank you for sharing that. I think we all hear and read the woe is me bad things about it, but as an opportunity for groups who may want to venture out on their own, I think there's more to learn from that. Remind us again, your company is Logix Health. How would they find you, and how would our listeners find your company and learn more about what you do?
So our website is www.logixhealth.com. And my email address, mgranovsky@logixhealth.com, GRANOV as in Victor, SKY. And I correspond with folks by email all over the country every single day related to reimbursement issues. You could be a Logix client, you cannot be a Logix client. We're all in the house of medicine together. There are 150 million ED visits. We're all trying to do the right thing and support the safety net. And I'm literally happy to help anybody.
And I can attest, and Mike is not just saying that, it's true. I've seen him do it. Mike and his company are very responsive. You can find them at ASAP, and you can find them in all sorts of places. And Mike himself, as he said, is open to questions, discussions, and feedback. And I'm sure you're learning something every day. We'll put all that information in the show notes so people can find it. So, Mike, thanks very much for joining us today and sharing a little bit of perspective on how you got to where you are and the important things we need to know about what really underpins the finances of what we do.
Dr. Jolly, thank you.
And thank you for joining us in this installment of our M-Centric podcast series, The Shift Report. And special thanks to Dr. Mike Granovsky for sharing his important insights. For more content, networking, and innovation in the world of emergency medicine, please visit mcentric.org. And another thank you to our sponsor, Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Learn more at lotusclinicianwellbeing.com.